What is going on? I want to welcome you from half court for today. I am Sean Murphy, and we got a packed episode of From Half Court for you today. We recorded earlier in the week, and I wasn't able to get this up in time. And a lot has happened in the NBA world, in the Pistons world, since we recorded that episode. So I figured, you know what? I'm going to hop on. I'm going to record a little bit, talk about the couple of games that have happened this week with the Pistons before we really dive in with Troy and I's conversation. Also, obviously, the news of Kyrie Irving dropped earlier this week. We absolutely have to talk about that. But first, before we get into all of the basketball and all of those things, I would be remiss if I didn't at the top of the show acknowledge the fact that we lost someone very significant in the Detroit sports world today. Specifically, Andy Isaac passed away earlier this morning. This is directly from the World of Isaac Twitter account. Good morning. Andy passed away peacefully this morning beside his loving family. We thank you all for your loving support and love over the years. This was a genuine space of laughter and kindness. Please carry this spirit on in honor of Andy. As always, Saturday forever and the Bears. And he was someone that I always just, I'm sure as a lot of people who have been in the Detroit sports world over the years, that is just somebody that's brought a lot of joy and has brought a lot of laughter to a lot of people, especially in a lot of dark times and a lot of difficult days. Sports is always something at the end of the day. Obviously, we want to see our teams win. We want to see, the state of Michigan thrive, do well, all those things. But in the interim, it's in really ultimately it's about escaping. It's about, the getting away from the dark realities of each and every day. And that's someone that really was able to, in a time, especially of a lot of division and a lot of crazy things that are going on in the world, he's someone that was really able to, bring a lot of laughs. Whenever I walk in LCA and I see the Sausage Hut, I always think of Isaac. I remember walking in the LCA during a game, and I believe I saw him by there screaming and going crazy. And I just remember that making me laugh really hard. Someone even posted a video earlier today. I'll try to link it if I remember down below of him reviewing root beer float peeps, and that just made me laugh insanely hard. And I mean, the fact that when it was announced that he was going to be going into hospice care, that all of the major teams in Michigan, essentially. I mean, Michigan State, one of his beloved teams, the Red Wings, the Tigers, the Pistons, the Lions, they all put a Saturday tribute up on their big boards as well, and that just speaks to the level of respect and love that there was for him throughout the Detroit community. So I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that off the top, because I know a lot of people in Detroit and in the Michigan area are hurting today, are sad. And I know when I go to get pizza next, I'm going to be grabbing an extra slice for Saturday in honor of my guy Isaac. So rest in peace to Andy, man. World of Isaac is always going to be one of the greatest social media accounts in the history of Detroit sports. They truly don't make human beings like him. So just wanted to acknowledge that off the top because he deserves it, quite frankly. A team that also deserves, a lot of recognition is the Detroit Pistons, who are now winners of 8 of their last 10 after they fell to the Los Angeles Clippers last night. And before that, obviously, they had a couple dominant performances against the Utah Jazz and the Brooklyn Nets, respectively, and beat teams that, quite frankly, they were supposed to beat. And now they go up against a team that's a little bit more of a challenge, albeit they've been sliding, they've been struggling for wins. They're in that play-in race in the Western Conference, but still, it's James Harden, who's one of the greatest scorers in the history of basketball, even at his age, even, at this stage of his career. He can go off on any given night, and that's exactly what he did against the Pistons last night, going for 50 points. Now, granted, JB pointed out after the game, Cade pointed out after the game, it's awful hard to stop someone when they get to the free throw line for 20 attempts. And that is absolutely a factor. But I also think there were a lot of things that the Pistons could have done as well. I think they were late on a lot of rotations. I think, quite frankly, you could see the effect of the late start on them in this game. I mean, Asar Thompson had an off night in particular. Not very often do you see someone that is primarily guarding being guarded by Asar Thompson, go for 50 points. But I mean, that's really the thing. No one could really stop James Harden this night. I mean, he was absolutely exploding all over the court. And granted, I think he gave them some real opportunities with some poor shot attempts throughout the game to really get back into it. And to the Pistons' credit, they did. I mean, in the fourth quarter, there was a brief moment where they were up and it looked like they were going to pull away and actually get the victory in this one. But uh, too many mistakes, a lot of fouls. Jalen Duren actually fouled out of this one. And even when he was in, he just wasn't really able to impact the game. We talk actually quite a bit in this podcast about how awesome Jalen Duren has been since the new year. And I don't want that to be lost in this episode because he has absolutely been stellar. His ability to protect the rim, his overall athleticism, the impact that he can have on the game is something that he's really starting to recognize. But at the same time, it's impossible to not acknowledge that he just didn't have it in this one. I mean, outside of his passing, he was kind of struggling all over the place. I mean, he only had three field goal attempts. He was 3 of 6 from the line. He had 3 rebounds on the defensive end. So the Pistons, quite frankly, they struggled in this one. They were they did win the rebound. They did win the rebound battle. They did when they did get in the fast break, they were able to be relatively effective. But I mean, for a Pistons team that's been really good at protecting the paint and has been really good at limiting damage in that area, they allowed 60 points in the paint against the Clippers last night. And when you're not necessarily winning that battle, when that's a big thing that this team relies upon, especially within their identity, that's something that you're going to struggle with. And granted, you're going up against James Harden, you're going up against, Zubac, who's been a really, really good piece for them over the years, kind of one of the more underrated players in the NBA. He had 22 in this one. And then Bogdanovich, who's probably been having the worst season of his career, just randomly comes out against the Pistons and has a solid 23-point outing and looks like the Bogdanovich of old. And quite frankly, I just didn't expect that in this one, but that's exactly what happened. And Detroit, like I saw people say, oh, Cade needed help. And listen, Cade had an awesome game, all things considered. He had 37 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds. He was absolutely stellar, but compared to James Harden's 20 attempts at the free throw line, he only had 6, which I know we've talked a lot about him getting the whistle and the respect that, he deserves. He does get hacked a lot on the offensive side of the ball, but at the same time, he was still able to maximize a lot of his opportunities and still had a really good game. But it's not like he didn't have help in this one. I mean, Dennis Schroeder had his best game as a Piston in this one. He had 21 points. He had Malik Beasley with 14. But really, I think when you're asking, like, what was the ultimate contributor that they missed in this game, I think it's probably going to be Jalen Duren, just because those lob attempts, those shots close to the rim have really been major for this team. Whenever Jalen Duren is playing at a high level, this team very rarely loses. So to me, when I look at this one, I don't want to pin it on a specific player. I think this was an all around loss. A lot of players struggled. This was a very oddly officiated game, which is bound to happen when you're going up against the James Hardens of the world. But at the same time, it's impossible to not look at this one and go, well, that's bizarre. And again, this is coming out off of a very good stretch for the Pistons. They're still 8-2 in their last 10. They beat the ever living out of the Utah Jazz the other night, which quite frankly, you're supposed to do. I don't even know who the Utah Jazz were putting on the court that night. They are as transparently tanking as a franchise can. And quite frankly, they need to start winning sooner rather than later, because at a certain point, that just isn't cute anymore. So Danny Ainge is a great executive. They have, a fantastic coach in Will Hardy, but I'm sure he's getting sick of the losing as much as anybody. So, for me, when I look at when I look at the Pistons stretch of late, they're beating the teams that they're supposed to beat. They're still on the road to improvement. They're still 7 games over 500, which, for this group is phenomenal. It's just, again, they need to, on those specific nights when you're going up, when you have to know your matchups and the discipline has to be there, but also when you're in a West Coast game, when it's a late start time, especially when you're in a city of like Los Angeles. I don't want to speculate what guys are doing the night before or night after. I know people bring that stuff up, but for me, it's just you got to be ready to play. You got to be aware that you're going to be in route for some shenanigans, especially against a James Harden. So to me, that's really what stood out in that Clippers game. I don't think it's anything, to harp over. The Clippers are a good team. The Pistons ultimately split their season series against them. It was a difficult environment in the Intuit Dome, which actually was popping, all things considered. And, the Pistons, that was their first time going up against the wall, which, by the way, I think that stadium is awesome. Shout out Steve Ballmer. By the way, another thing about this Pistons game, we had a lot of celebrities and notable people in the crowd for this one. I mean, we had President Barack Obama sitting next to Steve Ballmer watching this one. I tweeted out, Brock said, I need to go see Kate Cunningham, which, listen, I'm not getting into politics in this episode. One thing that's objective, Barack Obama knows ball. That's all I'm going to say. Another thing, other people that were there as well, we had Jalen Rose, who just continues to show out for the Pistons all season long. If you have any questions of who Jalen Rose is rooting for, I think those can be put to rest. But I mean, we had Richard Hamilton and his children in the building as well. So, oh yeah, and I forgot Jared Goff, the quarterback of the Detroit Lions. My bad, forgot that as well. Tom Gores, of course, was there taking in the action too. Amon-Ra St. Brown was in the building. So a lot of Detroit love, a lot of crossovers from Pistons and NBA past, from the White House, from the Detroit Lions, from ownership, all over. There were a lot of people in the building for the Pistons, and I think we're only going to see more and more prominent people have interest in what they're doing because Cade Cunningham is a very good basketball player. But another very good basketball player that we're probably not going to be seeing for a significant period of time, Kyrie Irving, for his ACL the other night against the Sacramento Kings. He was bumped by Jonas Valanciunas while trying to cut to the basket, landed very awkwardly, was very apparently in pain, had the Kobe-esque moment where he was able to go up to the free throw line and make his free throws before ultimately exiting the game for what would be the final time this season. And even just in a vacuum, Kyrie Irving tears his ACL is devastating. Kyrie Irving, we've been very critical, myself especially on this podcast in the years past of some of Kyrie Irving's antics, but Kyrie Irving as a basketball player has been one of my favorites ever since he's entered the league. And especially ever since he's came to Dallas, it's been all about basketball. But ever since the Luka Doncic trade, ever since everything that's happened in Dallas, he's been a great ambassador. He's truly grown and matured into a great leader. Honestly, the Kyrie Irving maturity arc is kind of one that's similar to Kobe's as well, to where as a younger player there were some issues, and mentally he was very stood in where he stand. He would very firmly stand where he stood, but now as an older player, as someone who's been through some things, as someone that is in another new team in Dallas, he's really been able to focus on basketball and, quite frankly, played some of the best basketball of his career alongside Luka Doncic and after Luka Doncic was traded. But outside of this vacuum, this is one of the most devastating injuries for one of the most devastating seasons in the history of professional sports. I mean, you talk about a fan base that was celebrating a finals run over the course of the last few months, was talking about how they had more finals runs in them for a decade plus to come because you have Luka Doncic on your team. And because as long as Kyrie Irving is healthy and is next to him, you have as good of a backcourt as you can have in basketball. Oh, and then you throw alongside that Derek Lively, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford. You have this really athletic, exciting lineup. And what do you do this offseason? You go and add Klay Thompson. You add Najee Marshall. You upgrade. You make this team better. And then all of a sudden, out of the whim, because of the personal feelings of a certain general manager who said, I can't win with this guy. It's me or him. Well, clearly me. That's what Dallas needs. He goes and trades Luka to the Los Angeles Lakers, who, as we document on this podcast and in this episode later on, have been really damn good. Have been awesome. ever since Luka Doncic has entered the lineup. They are second in the Western Conference now because they added Luka Doncic to the lineup. Granted, they also have LeBron James playing some of the best basketball of his career at 40 years old, which makes the GOAT debate against LeBron James just borderline impossible. But that's another conversation for a different day. You have all of that happen, and Anthony Davis in his first 2.5 quarters gets injured. And then less than a month later, Kyrie Irving, who has been playing the most minutes in basketball over the last month, ever since the trade, he goes out with a torn ACL. And quite frankly, at the worst time of the year to have this type of injury, because not only is this going to affect this season, but now this is going to affect the following season. And what do we talk about when the Luka Doncic trade went down? What did we say on this podcast? We said it is mind-boggling that the Dallas Mavericks were concerned about the injury problems of a 25-year-old Luka Doncic, but were okay going all in on an Anthony Davis who historically has missed a higher percentage of his games throughout his career than Luka Doncic, who is 6 years older. And then Kyrie Irving, who, again, we talk about one of the best basketball players to ever play the game from a skill standpoint, has hit one of the most clutch shots in the history of basketball in that game 7 against the Golden State Warriors in the NBA Finals. But he's 31, and he also has a lot of injury issues, and he's also missed a lot of games, and now he tears his ACL. And you go from a 10-year window to a self-appointed 3 to 4 year window. And Kyrie now, not only is the season done, but more than likely, he's not going to be back, putting it kindly, until after the All-Star break next season. And so now you have to rely on not only Kyrie Irving coming back and still being the same Kyrie Irving off of a torn ACL, which his game is very much predicated on skill. He is a great ball handler. He's an elite scorer. He has a great basketball mind. I have no doubt that we're still going to see a very good Kyrie Irving, but you are kidding yourself if you think that he's going to be the same from a burst and athleticism standpoint. You are lying to yourself if you think that's not going to have an impact on his overall effectiveness, especially coming off of that injury and shaking off the rust. Oh, yeah, you have to do that in a playoff run now alongside an Anthony Davis who you're going to have to learn to play with on the fly and somehow be expected to try and contend for a championship. So that's your first 2 years of your self-described 3 to 4 year window. So now your third year is really when all of this is supposed to come together. When Anthony Davis is 34, 35, who's supposedly going to be really healthy and still playing really well. With a Kyrie Irving who is supposedly going to come back from all this and still be really good. But they might go get a 36 or 37-year-old Kevin Durant in the offseason, which, by the way, I don't think they're in the pole position to go get Kevin Durant, especially after this type of Kyrie Irving injury. I don't see why Kevin Durant, especially, he talks a lot about the importance of loyalty. Why would he look at what Nico Harrison did to Luka Doncic and say, that's a franchise I want to go get, especially if you don't go and take care of Kyrie Irving this offseason after tearing your ACL because Jason Kidd was putting him out there for so long, because the Mavericks were having to repair their relationship. Oh, and by the way, all of this injury happened just hours after the Mavericks announced that they were raising their ticket prices by 8% for season tickets the following season. You couldn't make it up. You couldn't write it better. This is like The Office, but in a basketball situation. This is Dunder Mifflin, the basketball team, is what's happening in Dallas right now. So all in all, I mean, the as much as we laugh at the organization and the front office and the ownership group, the people of Dallas are really the victims here. Because not only do you lose historically a historically great player before he even enters his prime, whatever window or whatever hope of this trade even being salvageable went out the window not even a month after the trade happened. And you're in your ownership group seemingly is only going to double down on this. They keep leaking reports about how Luka was fat and how he's Hookah Doncic and how they're afraid and worried about his drinking issues and all of these different things, but they don't address the core fundamental problems that they have created for themselves inside their own building. I'm going to be I'm going to be reaching out to our friend of the show, Mike Curtis, who used to cover the Pistons, who has covered the Dallas Mavericks. I gotta get him on the podcast soon to talk about all of this. But that's really what's been on my mind this week in the NBA ever since we recorded last. This is the rest of the episode as scheduled this week from myself and Troy for the rest of this. So thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of this episode, and I will see you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today. I am Sean Murphy, joined by the Marquette's movement shooter, the best baller in the neighborhood, Troy Sergey. Troy, my friend, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Sean. We had a great stretch of Pistons basketball since we talked last. Got to beat the Boston Celtics, defending champs, by double digits, as well as the Brooklyn Nets the other night. Of course, unfortunately, we lost to Denver on Friday, but just some good all around Pistons performances that I think are going to be worth talking about this podcast.
Yeah, the Pistons had one hell of a February, to the point where right before the podcast, it was announced that JB Bickerstaff actually was named the coach of the month for the Eastern Conference because the Pistons were dominant in that stretch. Not only, did they go on a massive winning streak, they won 9 of their last 10, but on top of that, they won a lot of those games by double digits. And a lot of people, around the league, there was some skepticism just because the schedule for the Pistons in that load wasn't necessarily the most challenging. But then, like you said, Troy, they face the heavy hitters in the Boston Celtics, who, they're going through their own struggles and kind of in an interesting wave, but the Pistons just outright dominated them. And people will go, oh, well, the Boston Celtics are without Jaylen Brown. But people, Detroit people would be very quick to point out, like, you think missing Jaden Ivey is just a small thing for this Pistons team? Like, they're both missing their second options offensively. So if anything, that technically cancels out. Although I'd argue Detroit would need that type of player more. I digress. The point is the Pistons put belts to ass that night. And although they had the same thing happen to them against Denver, they were able to recover really well the night after against the Brooklyn Nets, to the point where Troy, Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart combined for 10, count them, 10 blocks, 6 of them coming from Jalen Duren, a career high.
Yeah.
So talk about just, we have been talking, all year about what the potential of a Jalen Duren is and why, we're so conflicted on, wanting to, see this through, but also needing good play from that position immediately. He's more than answered the call, Troy. And I think we're starting Jalen Duren. I think we're truly starting to see the surge, like the surgence of Jalen Duren as one of the best bigs in the NBA.
Which is so fun to say because I don't know if we would have been saying that in the first month or two of the season. So just to see the
No, we
progress
would
that
not.
he made. But, just with him and Stu, Sean, their basketball IQ on the defensive end is off the charts. I mean, you
Mhm.
watch those games and they're just so locked in. They're becoming masters of the paint on the defensive end. And in a league where the traditional big has changed over the past 5-10 years, these guys are really showing just really how important it still is to have a defensive nightmare down low in the paint. And
Mhm.
it's fun to watch because that's kind of Detroit Pistons basketball, right? The days of
Yeah.
Ben Wallace, right? And even the bad boys as well. I mean, just that defensive pressure of I dare you to drive to the lane, right? I
Yeah.
dare you to try to score in the paint when I'm guarding you. It's that kind of basketball that affects winning. And
Yeah.
I think it's no coincidence that we've seen the Pistons win some games.
Yeah, they're top 5 in the league in paint defense. Isaiah Stewart in particular is number 1 in the league for players with, field goal percentage at the rim. But Troy, it amazes me how many players still continue to try Isaiah Stewart. Like, I think instinctively they see an undersized big, they see an opportunity to attack the paint and get to the bucket, but the scouting report has to be out by now. And Isaiah Stewart, like, we're legitimately talking about one of the best defensive players in basketball, not
Mhm,
on this team, not in this conference, in the game.
mhm.
Like, the fact that he has a lower field goal percentage at the rim than Victor Wembanyama and Evan Mobley tells you everything you need to know. And the fact that they still try this guy, and I think that's an important thing because, like you said, it's really important to be able to not give your opponents an easy bucket. Like it's something that they can rest their rest their morals on. Like the Celtics. The big difference in that game was Boston wasn't shooting well from beyond the arc, but also Detroit wasn't giving them a chance to recover by getting buckets in the paint. They only scored like 24 points in the paint that night. The Pistons outscored them by 40 in the
Wow.
paint.
Wow. That's unreal. I didn't realize that statistic. And yeah, I guess that Boston game too is there was no chance Boston was going to recover and score because of, you're right, the shots weren't falling, but also good luck trying to score another way. And when you can have that in your arsenal in the defensive end as a team, that's just going to build you for playoff basketball, Sean.
Well, and the other thing as well, and that I think really needs to be highlighted too, and I know this is a name and a player that we've been talking about quite a bit as well, but it makes their jobs a lot easier when these players' lives are living hell on the perimeter because they're getting pressed by Asar Thompson. And it's the fact that Trey, he's quite literally everywhere. He's wherever the ball is, he's wherever the action is, he's wherever a defensive stop is needed. And we said this earlier in the season, but now we're really seeing the full effect of it is not a coincidence that the Pistons win total started to drastically increase once Asar came in the lineup because he is, talk about one of the other best defensive players in basketball, someone who is going to be all NBA defensive team for years to come, just as a standard is Asar Thompson. Is like the thing that impresses me, like obviously, like I talk about like the pressure on the ball and his athleticism, like he can keep up with quite literally anybody. Like he can even guard fives. But the thing that's like insane about him too is he's so good in passing lanes and picking other players off and causing those like fast break situations. Like he never allows an offense to get into their set in an easy manner. And like that causes a lot of dysfunction, that causes a lot of, chaos, and that's caused the Pistons to win a lot of games.
Yeah, not just that, Sean, but just his ability to, on the offensive end, to sprint in fast breaks. And he's just a fast guy. He's engaged on both ends of the court. And you watch his ability to score the ball. It's because of hustle plays. It's because he's outthinking his opponent on both ends of the court, especially when he's on the offensive end. He's just a smarter player. And we're having these conversations in year two, Sean, which I think is the most fun about a conversation with an Asar Thompson and even a Jalen Duren in year three is, my goodness, there is a long stretch ahead where these guys are going to get sharper. They're going to get smarter. They're going to learn the NBA game even more, which is crazier because we're having these conversations. And I really like this core, Sean. And I know later, we'll talk about potential other players in the league that, might become available in the next year or so. It would be very hard to trade a guy like Asar Thompson. I would say he's one of the untouchables, right? You've mentioned
Oh,
that
absolutely,
before
without a
on
doubt.
this podcast. So, when you see the production from a guy like him, I think instantly that trade value, it's so high that it almost stops because, again, untouchable means you're not going to touch him. So,
Yeah, for sure. And there's still a lot of areas in his game where he has room to grow, which is the scary thing is that he's so good already.
mhm,
And, there's just still a lot of raw, potential in his game. And so, yeah, the Pistons are just quite frankly, they're playing phenomenal basketball. They're really starting to look the part on the defensive end. And that's really where a lot of, kind of that win streak really stemmed from, in my opinion. The Denver game, I know a lot of people, obviously it was their first loss in like, almost like 3 weeks. So obviously it's the one loss. You kind of like focus and hone in on that. I think it's important to remember that's a team that won the championship like a year and a half ago. They have the best player in the world, Nikola Jokic, on their side. The Pistons, did they make a lot of mistakes? Yes, but like they played a veteran team that is prone to causing other teams to make mistakes. And, it's a good measuring stick for where, like the Pistons still have to grow. Like we all knew that Detroit struggles when they go against bigs that not only can play make the way that Jokic does, but also the way that he could stretch the floor and is so unpredictable. Like we've known that's a weak spot. And you quite frankly probably faced the best stretching big or the best just overall playmaking big in the history of the game.
Yeah, no, you're right, and that just Denver team was prepared, I think, that Friday night, right? I mean, they just Pistons came out hot, but the Denver Nuggets, they were there to play. They were there to end the win streak. I think at times the Pistons just were trying not to lose, and then they got into a bigger deficit when, from the start, from the get go, Denver was out there to win. And yeah, I mean, Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic. I mean, these are stars of the game. Um, I think a loss like that you can take because of how talented your opponent is and was.
And quite frankly, they're playing for seeding in
Of
the
course,
in the
absolutely.
in the Western Conference. Like they're like both teams are in a position where they're playing for home court in the playoffs. And like it's getting pretty like we're getting to the point, Troy, where we can pretty comfortably say it would take quite a lot for the Pistons to end up being in the play-in tournament, because at this present time, they are 5 games above the 7th seed, which is the Miami Heat. Which, side note, I'm not sure how much, if any, Orlando Magic basketball you've watched of late, Troy, but it is astounding how bad this team is offensively with
Mhm.
Paulo and Franz on the court. Like it is astounding. I watched Franz blow a wide open layup to tie the game against the Raptors. Like it was as gimme as a gimme can get, and he just completely missed it. I don't even think it touched the rim.
Wow,
Was how
wow.
bad he missed it.
Yeah, I've watched them a little bit in stretches, and it just seems like I've watched them against big games like the Knicks and the Celtics, and those games, Sean. It seems like they're outmatched, like in every way, shape, or form. There's
Yeah.
really no competing. And when you're talking about playoff basketball or getting out of the play in, yeah, you got to want to compete. So, yeah, I don't know what to tell you about Orlando.
Yeah, I mean, not having Jalen Suggs is a massive blow, and
Mhm.
it sounds like they're gonna be without him indefinitely, potentially for the rest of the season. So, you know, it's a bummer what's happening in Orlando. But on the side of the Pistons, you're tied at you're right at the same spot as the Indiana Pacers and the Milwaukee Bucks when it comes to wins. And obviously, we've talked last week a little bit just about the gauntlet that the Pistons have coming up. But as of recording, Troy, this gauntlet pretty much starts tonight. And even though they go up against Utah, who is not the most competitive team, they are a well coached team. They are a team that the Pistons have historically struggled against, especially over the last couple of seasons. But then they really start to get tested later in the week when they face the Clippers, when they face the Warriors, and then when they face the Trailblazers, who have also been playing really well too.
And
So,
always a tough place to play on the road, Portland.
yep, for sure. Chauncey's got those guys playing their asses off. I mean, it's to the point where Portland is right next. Portland has one less win than the Phoenix Suns.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Portland's at 27 wins. The Phoenix Suns are at 28.
Wow, wow,
Yeah.
wow.
It's amazing how one win difference, how those 2 cities could have drastic different feelings about it. Like Portland, they have to be thrilled because that was not their outlook this season whatsoever. Like
Especially last
people thought they were gonna be the worst team in the Western Conference. But they're playing really hard. They could potentially, if they make a little bit of a run, they could potentially be on that window of a play-in spot. So, kudos to Chauncey on that. But, Troy, obviously with those matchups coming up in particular, I think it'll be interesting to see how they fare against the Warriors, especially, with the Jimmy Butler acquisition. They're playing very well of late and going up against that veteran experience and that type of team where obviously we know the talent level, but also we know how smart of a team they are as well. And playing in one of the hardest home, arenas, like home court advantages to go to in the league and, in the Chase Center. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this fares for Detroit. But, as we were stating, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic with how this season turns out. And we're going to be very soon previewing playoff opponents, Troy.
That's right. I'm looking forward to it. It's always, man, you talk about how playoff basketball is different than the regular season, and that's so true. But as you mentioned too, with Denver, just with what they're playing for, I mean, this is a stretch here in March and into April, Sean, where uh, we have some really meaningful regular season games that are going to impact the
Yep.
playoffs.
Yep. And this is also where teams really have to start, catching wind and ramping up for the playoffs. Like you have to start playing your best basketball. So, it's going to be interesting to see, the improvements that this team can make, how, just overall things develop as the season goes on. I think you continue to see, as well, just, point out about like Dennis Schroeder, like just the impact that he has when he's in the lineup, just as far as setting the table for this team, keeping them a lot more organized. And you can tell that like him and Malik Beasley, like, that relationship is real. Like like not only do they have like the off court chemistry, like we know about that, but like they play really well together too on the bench. And Malik, because of it, he's been playing really well of late. I know we've talked a lot about how great of a season he's had, but he's on pace, Troy, to have the fifth best, the fifth best shooting season ever, essentially.
Right, right. Yeah, my goodness, that chemistry's strong, but Malik, it seems like we talk about him every single podcast, and rightfully so. I mean, even that game, I know we lost, but against the Nuggets, he was shooting hot. Against the Celtics, my goodness, he helped us over the hump in that game, and he's playing winning impactful basketball, right? He's
Both
impacting the
sides.
stat book on both sides of the court. And you're right. I mean, when traditionally, I mean, we've talked about this, months prior, traditionally, when we have a guy that can shoot the ball, especially not quite sure, where we are, matchup wise against some of the East is okay. What's his value? What's his trade value? We didn't explore that for a second this year for a reason with Malik Beasley, because we
Yeah.
know how valuable he is to this roster and this core. And he's going to win us a playoff game, Sean. He is going
Yeah.
to win us a playoff game.
The one thing that's interesting with Malik is he's such a great three-point shooter. He's such an efficient offensive player overall. How is a guy that's that good of a shooter only shooting 66% from the line?
Yeah, it is an interesting.
Like, obviously, we
Yeah.
know that, like, we know that it's not like every single player is elite at the free throw line. Like, like LeBron James has historically been a pretty bad free throw shooter, right?
Mhm,
Like,
mhm.
like it's something that you can most certainly overcome if you are really good in other areas, which obviously Malik is. But it's just interesting for someone who's so effective that they're not a good like a good free throw
Yeah,
shooter.
yeah, it is different, of obviously the catch and shoot, you train, you practice, but you're right. Free throws are all about form at the end of the day, right? Of
Form
form,
in the
patient. Yeah,
mental
yeah.
aspect too.
Which some guys aren't built for that, right? You mentioned, like, even our best player of our generation, LeBron James, never really above 80% ever free throw shooter. So,
Yeah, always kinda I think, like, at his best, he kinda hovered around, like, that 75,
mhm.
76%, might have snuck around to 80 at one point, maybe, but, never just for whatever reason, just could never fully figure it out, and some guys I mean, like, we saw Mason Plumlee, he had to switch what
Yeah,
hand he's shooting from the free throw line. We've seen guys experiment with doing the underhand throughout history. There's, Jeremy Sohan, who only shoots at one hand when he's at the free throw line, so ultimately whatever works for you, but the point is like it's not exactly for a game of professionals. It's not exactly an easy skill to master, even surprisingly for as elite a shooter as Malik Beasley.
mhm,
So
right.
talking about what this Pistons team can do the rest of the season. Obviously, we want to see this team compete in the playoffs and truly get that evaluation before we start making decisions on, who should stay and who should go and what players that they should go after, because a lot of things are still yet to develop. But one team that we know, Troy, is going to have to make a hard pivot this summer is the Phoenix Suns. We mentioned them a minute ago. They've been one of the stories of the podcast throughout this season, but also just one of the stories throughout the league just because of the catastrophe that's been the Phoenix Suns. I mean, they're top 10 offense, but they're 27th in defense. They keep collapsing late in games and losing in disastrous fashion. The Phoenix Suns experimented with dealing Kevin Durant at the deadline, and their lack of ability to keep that in house is now costing them the whatever this season could have been. Not only that, but also you have Devin Booker right in his prime at 28 years old, not getting any younger, is, still has a lot of good basketball ahead of him, but he's also played 10 seasons in the league, Troy. We know that there's only so much of your window that you have to really compete. And so if I'm the Phoenix Suns, not only like we all know, it was reported earlier this week by Shams that Kevin Durant is going to be traded to a contender this summer. That
Mhm.
much we know. People have brought up whether or not Kevin Durant would be a fit in Detroit. I'm just going to flat out say, and listen, Troy, you know how much Kevin Durant's one of my favorite
Your
players of
favorite
all
players
time.
of all time, yeah.
So you know that like if it did indeed end up happening, I would of course welcome it just from a fan perspective. But Troy, there's no way in hell the Pistons should make that move. But Devin Booker is an interesting conversation. People talk about what the Pistons could give up. Of course, he's one of the elite scorers, although you would have to potentially give up a Jaden Ivey or one of those prospects and multiple picks to go and get that type of guy. Troy, do you think that is something that would be worth doing? What players would be off the board for you in that type of deal? Because Phoenix would want quite a bit in return for a Devin Booker who's right in his prime,
Mhm.
28 years old. But at the same time, Troy, like the Pistons have something cooking here. So it's a delicate balance that you have to take.
Right, right, right. Yeah, if we can make it happen, yes. And I think like a year ago, obviously we would be jumping, up and down of trade the house. Anyone but Cade, right? We would say
Yep.
a year ago. And this year, maybe not quite, the case. I think yeah, Ivy, I think is the given one. I personally, I don't want to touch Duran. We already mentioned Thompson, Asar, untouchable. So Ivy, I mean, you throw Tobias in there, and we literally just talked about how valuable he is, but I can't see a world where Phoenix wouldn't want a quick guy on offense to score like a Malik Beasley or at least a first
Yeah.
round pick.
Well,
So
well, it's important to remember he's on a 1-year deal, so
okay,
he's
that's right.
technically a free agent this summer.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, but for like there's certainly like when you talk about the assets, that's a whole other conversation. But of course, Devin Booker is someone that would make a lot of sense. He would play really well, alongside of Cade Cunningham. I'm sure there would be some form of interest on his end to come home and to play in Detroit. We obviously see him all the time repping the Michigan gear, like repping Michigan State when they got to play at the Breslin Center,
yeah.
repping like the Tigers and Red Wings stuff all the time. We've seen him in a Grand Rapids Griffins jersey a couple weeks ago for crying out loud. But I just think from his perspective, I think he wants to go to a situation where he can go and get set up to win. And I think that's why it's like when you talk about what type of player the Pistons need to go out and get, it's like obviously you want to get someone who's an established, proven star, but also someone you can build with for like years to come. And like for a Devin Booker, I think he still has at least like 3 or 4 years left of his prime basketball, and I think he's still gonna, because of his skill and his ability to shoot, he's going to have like a longevity as far as his effectiveness in the game. His athleticism might not be the same, but he'll
Mhm.
certainly still be able to be a great catch and shoot and, like almost kind of like a enhanced Malik Beasley in his older age.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, and also, to catch you off the dribble too, right? I mean, he can score ISO basketball as well. I mean, he's one of the
Yep.
best in the league at that ISO game. So yeah, I think he makes a great fit, Sean. But we need to be really careful of who we trade and give up. We know that he's capable of being on a team. A first option actually on a team to get to the finals. Now I know that was the COVID the first year back in the stadiums, in COVID in 2021, but that Phoenix Suns team was cooking.
Yep.
And I think that's something worth bringing up. Of just like I know they started off that series 2-0 against Milwaukee. Of course, they lost it, but he's a guy that knows how to play winning basketball. Now, because of the roster configuration, with Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant and just the contract that is Bradley Beal, we know that that's not super realistic today to call Phoenix Suns a contender in any way.
No,
But we know that at least the talent is there. And if you brought him along a Cade Cunningham, you bring him along a Jalen Duren, that's a good recipe, Sean.
for sure. Now, one team that is going to hold a lot of leverage in these sweepstakes, and as earlier reported today, The Houston Rockets are also a team to look out for, especially for Kevin Durant, but also perhaps for Devin Booker as well. One thing that Houston has that Detroit doesn't is the picks of the Phoenix Suns, which if you're the Phoenix Suns,
Love
if there is anything that you would want is control of your own picks again, because as if you're going to if you're going to be bad, you want to at least have something to look forward to for being bad. Being bad with no incentive to be bad is about as bad as you can get in the league, because that's just there's no light at the end of that tunnel. You're just bad. And so, if you're Matt Ishbia, you quite frankly, like I know there's reports of, he might fire the general manager, he might fire the coach, but like I don't think this is a James Jones problem. I think this is you came in day one real hot and made a real very risky trade that, let's just call a spade, was not well thought out,
that. Mhm.
because what they gave up, and then you doubled down on that mistake by going and getting a Bradley Beal who was past his prime on a super expensive contract. Oh, and if as if that's not bad enough, he has a no trade clause, one of the only in the league. For some godforsaken reason, he was given a no trade clause.
Right, right. No, no, you're absolutely right. And you have to look back at that trade too and say, what did it even get you? I mean, you got
Nothing.
in the first round against the Minnesota Timberwolves. They got swept, didn't they, this past year? They got swept against the
Yeah.
Minnesota Timberwolves. So a first round sweep was your destiny in cashing in on these guys. Yeah, you got to rethink that trade, my dude.
Yeah, no, and I still think Matt Ishbia has a potential to be a really good owner. He really cares. He's pouring a lot of resources into the Phoenix community, into, like, to the Suns culture. Like he's clearly shown that he is not afraid to put together whatever is necessary to, like, make that team successful. But we've seen over and over again, Troy, these owners just come in and just immediately try to compete, just swing whatever, they have and just go for it immediately. And it's just not the solution. It's just not the way that you come in and build a winning recipe. It's never worked. And quite frankly, it never will.
Yeah, yeah. So it's gonna be an interesting summer for them, for sure. Durant, but we'll have to keep our eyes open for Booker and the right market. And you think Sean, no matter what team goes for Booker, if they do make a deal, the picks are going to be the incentive to why Phoenix makes that deal,
Yeah.
regardless of what team. Sure.
Yeah, yeah, I think the picks are gonna be a very big thing. Obviously, if they could get if I think preferably if they could be out of the Western Conference, I think they would obviously prefer that. But again, when you're just in a position of you just need to get the best return possible, you kinda overlook some of those things, and you don't really worry about what other teams' futures are, because you just gotta focus on getting your stuff in order, for a lack of better terms. So, it doesn't say a lot about the state of the NBA that we're talking about the prospect of another looming Kevin Durant trade, and that just kind of feels numbing in comparison to everything that's happened over the last couple of months. Like, am I crazy for that? Isn't that nuts?
Yeah, well, when Luka Doncic gets traded, and Kevin Durant has been traded before,
Yeah, exactly. These dominoes are just moving in such, like, crazy succession that
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
now that it's like, yep, oh yeah, all right, another day, another Kevin Durant trade. Let's go.
yeah.
What situation he's going
Right,
to
because
next?
before it was, well, if Kevin Durant can get traded, anyone can get traded.
But not these guys. And
Yeah,
now it's like, oh, well, Luca could get traded. Well, really, now it's only Victor that can't get traded. Watch, like, somehow in the summer, breaking news: Victor Wembanyama. That's not going to happen. But the fact that you can't definitively rule it out. I mean, Troy, we're in a world where John Cena's a heel. I know you're not a wrestling fan, but John Cena's a bad guy now. That's the world we live in. Anything can happen.
Yes, yes,
But
yes.
anyway, Troy, another thing to talk about as well, just speaking of that crazy Luka Doncic trade, that leans pretty well into another major story in the league, and it's that the Los Angeles Lakers, don't look now, Troy, but the Los Angeles Lakers are the second seed in the Western Conference. We talked on this podcast at length when they made this trade about how they're going to be an abomination on the defensive end. Well, somehow, Troy, they've been the best defensive team in basketball, if not very close to the top, since they made the Luka Doncic trade. And the pairing of Luka and LeBron is it could not have been better. You talk about the fact that they get to essentially stagger those two and have Luka or LeBron handling the ball all 48 minutes of the game is a massive advantage for them, just from a playmaking standpoint, just from a decision making. Like, you are always going to have the superior decision maker on the court at all times, unless you play Denver, and even then, it's pretty damn close. So that's working out super well for them. And then you throw in a really innovative and young, energetic coach in JJ Redick, who knows what buttons to push, who clearly really zeroes in on scheme and has a real dedication. I mean, he didn't sleep for nights leading into that Denver game. And I mean, Troy, they're only getting better. They're rising up the standings. Meanwhile, Dallas is hanging on for dear life for the 10th seed at the bottom and just hoping that Anthony Davis can come back in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah,
So,
it's two different universes, Sean.
yep,
Totally different universes, and yeah, I mean that Luka LeBron pairing is everything we hope for and better. And I just think even JJ Redick's ability to coach, especially on the defensive end, is a big part of their success too. Because, like we
which
mentioned, it's like, okay, this is going to be a clear struggle, but when you're a coach, when you're a rookie coach, and you're able to pull off defensive schemes like they are, when limit the your opposite opponent in 3-point shots and in the scoring in the paint. My goodness, it
yeah,
just changes everything on the offensive end where you don't have to overcompensate, right? Because I think
yep,
we thought that, okay, if they're going to win, they would have to overcompensate on the offensive end. They're playing great defense and they're
yep.
playing great offense. And yeah, that second seed is no surprise. Literally, the best team in the West besides the Oklahoma City Thunder. Think about that.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking at, like, another person to really name as far as, like, a big reason behind their success on that side of the ball in particular, you gotta look no further than Nate McMillan. I mean, we've actually had, Jamel McMillan, his son, who's also the coach of the, Motor City Cruise. He's been on the podcast before, but, Nate McMillan has been a really good coach in this league. Whenever he stepped in, he brought the Hawks to the Eastern Conference
Yep.
Finals, with Trae Young a few years ago, but also he's just a really good defensive coach, and to have him as like your associate head coach, someone to lean on, which by the way, Dwayne Casey was very much up for that job for, a very good part of the summer, but you bring in Nate McMillan instead, who's been really good in that seat. And to have him to lean on and to kind of be like a fellow, like essentially like your defensive coordinator alongside, JJ, who's clearly a really high IQ. Just we knew he was a great basketball mind, but the fact that he can put that into practice and coach this level of team with
Mhm.
these level of stars, like he's still going to have to do it over a long period of time. But in his first season, he's passing the test. And the fact that he has that team's respect is, that's about as high a praise as you can give to a coach, especially if you're coaching a guy like a LeBron James. So, we knew that was LeBron's pick. And listen, gotta tip the cap when you have to. It was the right pick.
It was.
And what they do this season, I still don't know if it gets any farther than the Western Conference Finals is their absolute ceiling. I don't even know if they reach that just because of how good the West is, and especially it's going to depend on some of the matchups. If they have to play a bigger team, we might really see in a playoff series their lack of size get truly exposed. But at the same time, when Jackson Hayes is available, he's playing really good hoops for them too right now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. We saw stretches even when he was with New Orleans of ability to play quality basketball on both ends of the court. But yeah, that was a surprise for me because I wasn't sure how he would gel in the rotation as the sole big now that you don't have an Anthony Davis. But it's been fun to watch, Sean, and I still think, man, you mentioned the ceiling being the Western Conference Finals. That's a fun Western Conference Finals, assuming that the Thunder will be in it.
oh, they will. Yeah, absolutely. And the Thunder will be there. And quite frankly, I think if we did see those two teams match up, like you said, it would be really fun. But I think once they get against a team like Oklahoma City with their size, athleticism, defensive ability, but also their youth, I think that's something that's gonna be really overwhelming for teams come playoff time. And Shea as well is playing extremely good basketball. So, just excited to see because it really does feel like when you look at just like the landscape of the league, it does kind of feel like they're finals to lose right now. But at the same time, I mean, Troy, we had that really interesting Eastern Conference game, like a couple days ago against the Cavaliers and the Celtics, where Cleveland they were down, I think, by like 25 at one point, and then they came all the way back to win in Boston. And that was a massive game, obviously,
Yeah.
because you're talking about the implications of like the two best teams in the in the league, but also in the conference facing off. Like essentially your, kind of your like Eastern Conference preview, and the fact that Cleveland's able to come out and win. I mean that was a statement, Troy.
Yeah, no, it absolutely was, and I think wasn't the first few minutes of the game like 25-3 or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, they came out. Yeah, like Boston was
Yeah.
dominating
I
this
know
one.
in today's NBA, there's a lot of swings and teams go on runs and stuff like that and comebacks, but that is a really hard hole to dig yourself in to start a game, 3 to
Yep,
25 against the defending champs. But to
yep.
come back and win, that just shows that this Cleveland team can fight. This Cleveland team, has talent that won't give up on both ends of the court. And this is a Cleveland team that can give Boston a run for the money and can beat Boston.
Yeah. Yeah, the fact that you can have that type of composure, to be able to come back from that type of deficit, especially in that hostile of an environment, that says a lot just about, kind of how they've grown and how they've evolved. And it's kind of hard to not envision that being the Eastern Conference Finals at this point. It would really take a lot, in my opinion. I mean, like the New York Knicks, I don't even know if they would make it past the first round if they were to face the Pistons, because that's a really competitive, intriguing matchup. And we've already talked, about at length of this team is still yet to beat one of the best teams in the league. Like, and even then they've I think you really start to see kind of the weight and the impact of how heavy of minutes Tom Thibodeau plays his starters as the season goes along. This Knicks team just has not been what we've expected, and they do not look like they're on the same level right now as Cleveland and Boston. So Troy, I think if we see Cleveland and Boston face in a 7-game series, I think that has a chance to be one of the best playoff series in decades.
I'm
Like
here for
like
it.
full stop. Full
Yeah.
stop. One I can't say confidently who would win right now because both teams are awesome.
Yeah, no, but we're here for it, Sean. We are so here for that matchup.
Oh, yeah, we absolutely are. And I think another player that's worth giving some flowers to is, a guy who's been really good in particular since the All-Star break. A guy that you really like to watch, Troy, Tyrese Halliburton. Since the All-Star break, he has been absolutely balling out. He looks like the Tyrese of old again, and it's good to see because at the beginning of the season it was genuinely concerning for a bit there. He's shooting 53% from 3
Yeah.
since coming back from the All-Star break. I mean,
Mhm.
Troy, what looks different about Tyrese now as the season has gone on? Do you think it was getting his legs under him? Do you think he maybe wasn't 100% health-wise? Do you think just the shot wasn't falling? What from your perspective has changed?
Comfortability on the offensive end. And I also think, yeah, when your shot isn't falling, it's hard to, make up for that in other areas when you are a score first guard. Well, I mean, you could argue he's a pass first guard, but I mean, I think he's more comfortable on the scoring end. It's what we've seen last season with him. It's been fun because he can get to his spots now, which I didn't quite see a lot in the beginning of the season with him. I think he makes his teammates better. He's been able to find, I mean, pull up some assists, Sean. I mean, he's getting some double doubles of late as well. So when I look at his ability, Sean, I just think more comfortability on the offensive end has been helping him score the ball better and dish out to his teammates.
Yeah, for sure. And he's one of the best players in the league when he's got it going. Obviously, Detroit's had a little bit better guard play this year than Indiana, but I mean, when we talk about that matchup for years to come, I think those guys are going to be pretty even as far as that goes. Although obviously, I think we both would probably give that edge to a Cade Cunningham there
Right,
for sure.
right, right.
Mhm.
Yeah, which is fun because last year that would have been a tough thing to say with
Yep.
Tyrese being an All Star, taking the team to the Eastern Conference Finals. But man, this Cade Cunningham season, Sean, I think really opened our eyes to what the future looks like with Detroit Pistons basketball.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's the fact that they have They have him on the ascension. They have Jalen Duren on the ascension. Isaiah Stewart's the longest tenured Piston, but he's still incredibly young too. This team has a long runway, and so we have a lot of interesting basketball to talk about for quite a good time to come, Troy. It's gonna be a lot of fun, and we're gonna be breaking it down all here, right here on From Half Court. If you like that, be sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video so that you can see more of our content. Thank you so much for joining. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you subscribe.